Thank you, Layla. That was really informative. I appreciate you taking the time to go through all of that with us. So now I'm going to pivot a little bit to talking about some of the security considerations you might be thinking about when moving your interviews to an online format. The first thing to remember is that cheating is always a risk, even in person. It's just a little bit easier online, and it's harder to find out if it's happening. There are a couple ways that candidates may try to cheat your process. The first one is just simply lying. Um, Questions that ask about experience are especially vulnerable to lying because someone can just do their due diligence and do some research into the position and the types of experience that someone might have and kind of cite that instead of actually having the experience themselves. So it's good to be very specific with questions about experience or try using a hypothetical question or something that asks for a specific behavior they've done in the past, an example from their past job. Candidates can also fake good. This is kind of related to lying, but sometimes it's subconscious and more related to being socially desirable. Just in general, avoid questions that have a clear, socially desirable answer in your interview, and that'll help you eliminate a lot of this problem. Probably the most serious consideration is a candidate having prior knowledge of your questions. And this is always accompanied with a security breach. Either someone gave the question that may be on your team if it's a friend. This is very uncommon. Or slightly more commonly, maybe another candidate copied down your questions and provided it to others. It's very hard to know if this has happened for sure. It's always a risk with any interview, even in person. One thing you can do is just search your actual questions online. A lot of the times, if they've been leaked, they actually will pop up if you Google search them. And that's one way that you can know if something has happened. Something that's kind of novel to the remote interview is the potential for a candidate to have someone impersonate them and interview on their behalf. This also applies to writing samples, tests, everything like that. And this really highlights the importance of having a video interview because it's very obvious if you've done a video interview when the person shows up for the first day on the job and they look nothing like the person you've interviewed. So just really important to have that from a security perspective. Kind of the takeaway from all of this is candidates will find a way to cheat if they really want to. But, you can do some basic stuff to make it less likely or harder for the ones that really want to cheat and eliminate kind of accidental or opportunistic cheating or the softer cheating. For interview security, these questions that we've somewhat discussed already is, is the person you're interviewing the person who actually applied? Really important and can be a factor if you're only using a phone interview. Second one is, are they cheating by searching online or looking for leaked questions? It's hard to know this, but you can just try to see if anything's available on the internet for your interview. Now, for the video interviews, another thing that can happen is there can be someone outside of your view that's in the room with a candidate and could be writing out answers or helping them in some other way. That being said, to a certain extent, you can tell if something's off in a video interview, just where the candidate's looking and how they're responding. So sometimes you can tell if this is happening. Last consideration is the candidate going to steal your questions and maybe post them online? There's really nothing you can do. There's been concerted efforts, even by companies in the past, to memorize entire tests using groups of candidates. This is just part of the selection world. And honestly, when we need to move forward with hiring in a remote setting, be aware of it, be proactive, try to prevent it, look to see if it's happened, but it's not something that should be dissuading us from hiring people. All right, now for the interview itself, a lot of times panels will like to send candidates interview questions in advance to give them a little bit time to prepare, or alternatively, either post those questions online. So it's really important to host those so that you're not giving actual documents to people. Another important security thing that's going to help your process is just have a candidate sign a security form. They can sign it and take a picture of it, send it to you. You can use a fillable form. You can even use instructions that have implied consent to the agreement. There's all different ways you can go about it. But have some type of security form or security statement. Be really clear that cheating won't be tolerated. And as mentioned before, ask those situational questions, those questions that for specific behaviors or specific experience, rather than using something that's knowledge-based and can be Googled very easily. It's pretty easy to tell if you ask these type of questions which candidates actually have that firsthand experience, or in which candidates might have just done some research on it. The last thing is, especially for experience, tell candidates that you're going to actually verify their experience later, with a reference check or some other method. Even if you never actually do it, this can prevent a lot of people from making false claims or exaggerating their experience. Yeah, as I mentioned on the last slide a little bit, a lot of people like to offer interview questions to candidates a couple minutes advance of the actual interview, so they can make some notes and kind of gather their thoughts. This can really help mitigate anxiety in the interview and reduce your environmental error exposure. Also, hosting those questions and like share screen can be a good way for the candidates to read along, especially if there's some sort of audio issue. But obviously, it's a security concern. Candidates can take pictures of those questions, or they can write them down in a way that you may not notice, and that's just always a reality. But if you use like a share screen, a Google Documents, a survey platform as some way that you retain ownership of your questions, then it just prevents them from having a digital copy or on their device. So they might, be a little bit more opportunistic or even accidentally share them with someone else. Now, at the end of the interview, once you've gone over all the security stuff, just remind the candidate of the security and the confidentiality so they have it in their mind leaving the interview practice. And if you've given the candidate anything that you don't want them to keep, just ask them to delete it. So some organizations go as far as having the candidate share their screen while they're deleting it. But at the end of the day, if they really want to keep it, they can. It's a little extra layer that reduces your likelihood. And when you're doing all of this, not as accusatory, because at the end of the day, you would follow your every security request, even if you never asked it. Most people are good people, not into your process. So if you accidentally even come across as accusatory, you may turn off some of your top talent. You just really want to avoid doing that. And lastly, end your interview on a high note. Talk about something positive. Talk about the next steps in the process if the candidate were to be selected. Maybe field any questions the candidate has about the process, maybe about position, maybe about your organization. If they're your top talent and maybe they weren't 100% sold on your organization, this is your time to clinch the deal. This is the time for you to sell yourself to the candidate at the end. And that keeps everything on a high note and keeps your candidates positive. With that, I'll transition on to our next topic, which is other assessment types. A lot of you may be thinking to yourselves, interviews are wonderful, but what if I'm doing something else, like a multiple choice test? So we're just going to address these really briefly, kind of give you some starting points of what you might be able to look to do. So a multiple choice test is really easy to do online. There's whole platforms built for it, like SurveyMonkey. There's a lot of other ones, custom ones, different survey platforms. It's really important to use unique candidate links that only work one time, have limited time windows that the test is going to be available, and collect start and end timestamps so you know when the candidate's actually taking your test. You can also make sure that you only give the candidate one question at a time. You can prevent them from going backwards, and this can help mitigate some of the security risks associated with online tests. You can also consider remote proctoring yourself through a video conference and have the candidate share their screen and watch them actually do the test. Obviously, there's some administrative burden to this. You can consider it, and there's also companies that offer this service. Again, the type of question your test. If you ask a knowledge-based question that can be researched or Googled, it's going to impact your security. But if you do need to ask those, consider setting a shorter time limit so there's less time for candidates to Google your questions. This is not really a factor in person because they may not have access to the internet, but something to consider when it is a remote setting. There are also some really advanced methods to reduce the method of cheating. You can have unique forms for every candidate that are demonstrated to be psychometrically equivalent. You can also do things like randomize your items and orders and even the options in the items. But these techniques require a lot of preparatory work, and you're going to need some professional help if this isn't your field. So contact a testing professional if you're interested in looking into that for multiple choice tests. There's a lot of great professionals out there that'd be more than willing to help you. The other thing you can do system-wise, you can actually use a system built for online testing. A lot of people lock down the screen for the candidate. You know, and some vendors are going to offer that built-in remote proctoring or other features, even scoring. Just, you know, remember, whenever you reach out to these vendors, a lot of times it's going to be pretty expensive, so be prepared for that. But, you know, if you have a test that's important, you're going to test a lot of people, or it's a really important position, it can be worth it. So just consider that in your toolbox. Work sample tests and performance exercises can also be done online, but some of them are a little tricky. If you want to do any sort of document-based test, like an inbox task, any type of written task, you can do those online with the stuff we've already mentioned, like a Google Documents, a survey platform, anything that retains your ownership of the question. If you really need to, and you're not planning on using the test again in the future, you can just actually send them a copy and have them send it back to you at a pre-specified time. Just understand that it's a little bit less secure, and you're probably not going to want to use it again. You can even do Excel exercises in this way, or even have them perform something in Google Sheets for you. Obviously, it's not exactly the same as going to be on the job, so you know, adjust your expectations accordingly and try not to make it too complex. You can have candidates prepare presentations and even deliver them to you during their interview, or make a meeting plan. There's all different ways to be creative to take some sort of element of the job and replicate it, and then have your candidates do that. Things that involve like physically doing something like a job tryout or a physical ability test are hard to do. If it's super basic, maybe you can have them do it through a video conference, but most of the time, maybe these aren't the best option. For all of these, just make sure all your candidates have equal time for any assessment or test that you do. And you consider alternatives. One alternative is having them submit a portfolio or something of the work they've done in their past. Is always an opportunity to fake this, but in most cases, it's going to be better than doing nothing at all in this remote setting. Writing exercises, similar to work samples, host them online. You can even use something like a Google document and have your candidate actually do the writing exercise while you're in the Google document with them. You can see everything they do, their whole process, and give you a lot more information than just seeing their written work at the end. Just make sure you're scoring that in a fair manner, of course. And the same guidelines apply. Avoid stuff that can be researched. Stick to like analytical tasks or things that ask for firsthand experiences. And for writing in particular, if you're not interested in what they write and just how they write, your prompt isn't really important. So that's not really a security issue if you just evaluate only, kind of the mechanics of their writing. As always, set up a time window, helps reduce the risk of candidate cheating. And you consider that remote proctoring via something like a video conference. And that's all we're going to cover for today. We hope to get in depth on more of these topics in the future later on in the year. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to George, our moderator, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about PTC and facilitate our Q&A.